Okay, so we are almost there. Okay, that's live. Let me just get the link. Um, hmm, how do I do that? Exactly. Why? That's not right. I know that's not right. Let me see. There we go. Okay, I'm gonna send you the link on Facebook. Uh, there you go.
Okay, so I'm
All right,
back.
you ready to go?
Yes, ready to get this
Great.
started.
All right, and we are going live in three, two, one. All right, hello and welcome to this video, which is something I've never done before, where we're discussing, my last few videos have been about Joss Whedon and about the nevers and about separating the art from the artist. And today, I'm not just going to be talking about that on my own. I am joined by Jessica Donegan. She is a fellow YouTuber and the author of Follow Me, Tattered Veils, a fantasy novel that is available on Amazon now, and the link is in the description. And I've asked Jessica here today because she's someone that has at least a slight different viewpoint from me, and I expressed in one of my earlier videos how I really am struggling to understand the other side of this, and so I think that's it's important to talk to people who have that other opinion. So first of all, thank you, Jessica, for agreeing to do this, and I'm just wondering like how you are today and how you're feeling about this discussion.
Well, thank you for having me. And I'm really excited for this discussion. I think it's hugely important for people with maybe opposite ideas to go ahead and talk about them. It's not like we're going to change each other's minds. It's more like I want to really know where you're coming from. And hopefully the same is true in reverse. And that way, we both like get to know each other's sides, and especially in something that's TV show related, where it's more like an opinion than it is something that's really going to change the world. I think if you can't have conversations there, then you can't have conversations about bigger issues either.
Great. Well, I thought where it'd be a nice place to start is maybe a few things that we agree on, and I think that definitely uh, it seems to me just from hearing the brief YouTube exchange that we've had in the comments of YouTube videos that we're both at least historically like fans of Joss Whedon's work. So I was just wanting like a brief overview from you of like where you first encountered his work and like what that sort of meant to you over the years.
Mm. So I first caught Whedon's work with Buffy. That was on the WB when I was in high school, all the way through a little bit, well, to the end of my senior year, I guess. And I loved it. I love the whole unexpected element of Buffy where you've got like the stereotypical damsel in distress, but actually she's super strong and is the one that we're relying on to save the world. I think that's a lot of fun. And I love the team elements that come in Whedon's work. And of course, I also love the snappy dialogue. And since I was hooked right away, I also went on to watch Angel, Dollhouse, and Firefly as well. I've seen the Avengers. I think that's a little bit different from some of his
Hmm.
other work. But it's not bad. It's just not, I think maybe I'm less superhero oriented than I am other elements of his work.
Yeah. Um, Now one of the yeah, I never watched Buffy as it was airing. It's
Hmm.
something that I came to later. But
Hmm.
I've come to like really appreciate that stuff, and I love Firefly, and I think I am a bit of a superhero guy. Honestly, I'm susceptible to that kind of thing. So, I loved his version
Hmm.
of the Avengers, and I guess what I appreciated about his work is that to me it always seemed to be coming from a real place. Like it always seemed to,
Hmm.
especially Buffy, like really to me Buffy says something about like what it is to grow up and what it is to become an adult and what it is to just live like a good moral life. Like I think Buffy like encompasses all of that. Do you think I'm going too far or would you agree with that?
No, I think Buffy is great. It does really well with those tragic beats. I think it's an excellent growing up, coming of age story. And it does force us to ask a lot of questions about what our ethical role is, what kind of responsibilities we have, whether we want them or not. And then what you do with that going forward. I think that's all great within
Yeah.
Buffy.
Um so the one of the questions I wanted to ask is do you think when cuz one of the points that I made in one of my videos, which you rightly corrected me on, was that I make this hyperbolic statement about if Hitler had written great novels like I would read them because that is what makes it interesting to me, um, and I stand by that in a sense. But what you pointed out in the comments was that well, yeah, but if he was you know, if he was if he was still alive and you were funding his campaign, would you still buy his books? And of course I wouldn't. But one of the things I wanted to ask was, do you think that the quality of work is important when we're considering whether or not we should support an artist? So, in other words, like we both agree that Joss Whedon's work has some artistic merit. Do you think that is relevant when we're discussing um, whether or not we should support said artist's work?
I mean, I think it has to be at least a little bit relevant because if you didn't like the author's work or if the work wasn't any good, we wouldn't be having the
Hmm.
discussion at all, right? Just like, oh, well, that guy's trash all around. Let's
Yeah.
just leave him alone. Um, so it's hard to get away from that. I think you do have to consider the quality of his work. For me, another element that I have to consider with Whedon is that when we're talking about his work, it's not just him involved, right? Like he's got all these cameramen and all these other writers and the actors and the stunt people. I'm funding a whole lot of things if I buy into a Whedon work. I'm funding TV that I like to see because we both agreed that we
Yeah.
enjoy those shows. And I'm funding all the actors and other people who help support that. So I have to think about those elements too when I think about whether or not I want to see or continue to talk
Yeah.
about his work.
Um, yeah, and because yeah, I think it's relevant in a sense, right? Because it's relevant in the
Hmm.
sense that like this wouldn't have come up otherwise, right? If we're talking about something with real
Hmm.
artistic value, that's why people are sort of passionate about this kind of thing. And if we're talking about something that isn't, um, then maybe people won't come out of the woodwork. Maybe people won't be as impassioned. But like I think, for example, I definitely agree with you that Harvey Weinstein shouldn't be able to uh, make any more movies, despite the quality of his work.
Hmm.
Um, Maybe that's not so relevant actually, but let
No, I think it's a great point that part of it is
yeah,
like a shifting scale, right? Like I think part of what we disagree on what Whedon did or didn't do, which I think arguably
yeah,
we don't know at all. Like we don't know. But then on top of that, what he did was it so bad that we have to consider it when we're consuming his work. So you make a great point. Like we both agree, Harvey Weinstein definitely don't want him to continue to do things. Now, what he's done work wise, are we supposed to not watch that because he was, he's an awful dude? There's so many other people involved in that work. So many people, like, I would love to continue to support Frida, right? And other movies
yeah,
like that. Just because he filmed them or helped fund them doesn't mean we should just discard it and never talk
yeah.
about it again.
I guess I guess what I'm getting at is um
Hmm.
if I guess what I'm getting at is so sort of like the quality of the work matters in a sense because it's why people are talking about this, right? We agree that the work is really
Hmm.
good, that it's useful, right? Um, because a lot of people,
Hmm.
one of the criticisms that I've heard is, I've really just realized that it doesn't matter. Uh, no, it's okay.
Oh
We're
no.
live and everything, but it's just that like it's just that my name's it said Jessica Donegan under my face and it said Daniel Morgan under your face and that was not right. But I've fixed that now. I fixed that now. Uh, yeah, yeah, yeah.
I think
But
people will get it.
so it's the quality of the work is relevant, or people wouldn't be talking about it. Having said that, like it's not really for anyone to judge artistic merit, right? So we can't say that like, well, you can get away with bad
Hmm.
behavior if your work is good. But if your work is shit, then you can't
Hmm.
get away with bad behavior. Like we can't really be in a position that we're saying that. So what it's got to be more about is, and I've heard people talk about like, oh well, it's just a TV show. Watch another TV show, and for me that's a little bit offensive because, well, offensive might be the wrong word, but for me that's annoying because I don't see art that way.
Hmm.
Like for me, art is much more important than that. Like the kind of if someone can watch a piece of art and can make more moral decisions because of it, or it affects someone's life in a positive way, or if they become part of a greater community. Like I don't get this idea that, oh, it's just a TV show. So I was wondering if we could agree on those points, that
Hmm.
a um it's not so much about whether the quality of the work, because that could be interpreted different by different people, but b, like it's more it's important to discuss because art is really really a valuable resource in society.
Hmm. No, I agree. Art is a very valuable resource, and it's not just about quality of work because it is a little bit objective. I think there's a lot of sliding scale factors that go
Yeah.
into this kind of
All right.
decision.
All right. So we sort of agree on that. So I guess the
Hmm.
point is then, like, what were the allegations, and do they
Hmm.
justify the reaction that has come about from this show and from his work? Because the reaction is it's been an extremely negative, critical response. And I wonder if you feel that the
Hmm.
critical response is um, is appropriate for the quality of the show. Like, because you've seen, like, I've only seen the first. I think there's only 2 episodes out at the
Mhm.
moment. So you've seen the first 2 episodes.
Yep.
Do you think that the critical response matches the quality of those 2 episodes, or do you think that the critical response has been affected by the fact that it's a Joss Whedon show?
I mean, for me, I do think The Nevers has been a rough start. Like, I haven't loved anything I've seen so far, but I also haven't hated it, you know? I still want to keep watching it. I love the premise. And I think there's a lot of potential in the premise. And I don't think we should necessarily discount that out of hand, especially if you consider, like, if you have a problem with Josh Whedon, he isn't going to be helming any of the episodes
Right.
after six. Like, someone else is taking those over. So, and I do think I've seen a lot of people just review bombing because they're upset. And I don't think that's fair. This show started before the most recent allegation. Well, really, most of these allegations came out. I know the stunt actors have been discussing how the stunt actors on Buffy have been discussing how they were mistreated for a while now. But even though what happened with Charisma Carpenter happened a long time ago, she just brought this up when Ray Fisher brought his
Mm-hmm.
allegations forward, and the Nevers had been well underway by then. So I do feel a little bit like people are punishing a show that was already in production. And that's not necessarily fair to everyone who is involved with the show or even necessarily the quality of the show. Like, if you don't like it, that's cool. But maybe don't just say you don't like it because you're upset with something that happened
Yeah,
with
and
one of
I
the
think that's
directors.
where a lot of my sort of frustration came from, was from that lack of, I felt like, lack of integrity.
Mm,
Like, you just, I mean, on Rotten Tomatoes, the critical response is like less than 50%, and nothing gets less than 50% unless it's like laughably bad. And this clearly isn't
mhm,
that. I mean, even if you think that it isn't brilliant, it's clearly very, very competent. And it clearly has a lot of
mhm,
things going for it. So it's quite clear to me that the critical reception is clearly affected by the accusations. But let's talk about the
mhm,
accusations then, because I guess the conclusion is that that's what it's about, right? Are the accusations bad enough to deserve this? So, um, I've got an article here from ScreenRant.com, and
mhm.
it
Yeah.
basically goes through all of the accusations. The first one, again, I want to dismiss this offhand, but I will give you, a chance to maybe legitimize it if you want to, is about his marital infidelity. Now, as far as I'm concerned, that is none of anyone's business and just doesn't factor into this at all. But I'm willing to let you tell me if I'm wrong about this or not.
So the marital infidelity, to me, the only reason that would cause any red flags was because the accusations were with other
Mm-hmm.
people on set. And I was wondering if those were consensual situations. But since that doesn't get into any of that, I think really it's not our business as far as that goes. Like, it's all speculation. And no one has come out and said anything either way. Their divorce is their business. And I'm sort of sad that that came out in the media that way.
Yeah, I mean, I think it doesn't even get into what you even, if you think that's a good thing or a bad. Like, it doesn't even get into that. That seems to me like a completely private matter, and it's,
Mm,
so I think we both seem to agree on that. So the next thing
mhm.
that's on this article is the Ray Fisher accusations. Now, again, like,
Mhm,
for me, when I read this, it is a little bit vague, and the reason he says it's vague is because he says that he can get sued. He's still under contract with the film. Um, this seems to me, the Ray Fisher stuff. It seems to me like uh the way Joss Whedon saw the character and the way the character was originally written, there seems to be like a schism there,
mhm,
and this seems to be like a creative difference. And that Joss Whedon told Ray Fisher, like, you're an actor, like, you don't get a say in this because your job is to act the lines, and we both disagree with who this character is, but you're going to do it my way because I'm the director. Now, am I missing something
mhm.
here?
So I think my issue is I don't really know what happened. Like he said that there is a discussion about the cyborg character, and if that's all that happened, then I guess fine. Everyone's allowed to interpret the character how they want, and it's unfortunate, I think, in a lot of ways that we went that way with Cyborg, but that's not really here or there. My concern is that we don't really know what happened. And he does talk about how it was unprofessional, it was racist, it was degrading. And he also talks about part of the reason he's not going further into it is because he feels he's being punished already for coming forward and he doesn't want other witnesses to be punished when he brings up those specific situations. And I mean, like it or not, they did pull him from the Flash movie that he was originally credited to be in. They said, no, we don't want the cyborg here anymore. And, the same way they said, they pulled Whedon off of the Nevers, and there's always a reason they do that. But I think we both know Whedon's not in the Nevers anymore because of these accusations. And I think the same thing with Cyborg. Ray Fisher's not in the Flash anymore because he made these allegations. So I think his reason for keeping quiet and protecting other witnesses is highly valid.
Yeah. So I mean, the racism thing he seems to have dropped now, but definitely at the time there were these like racist overtones to what he was saying.
Hmm.
Again, one of the things I heard at the time was this. I mean, it seems so ludicrous now that I barely want to bring it up, but one of the things that I heard at the time was that Whedon was quoted to have like talked about changing his skin color in like post production.
Ooh, I didn't hear that, but that would be a big oof.
Yeah, well, it seems like that when you say it, but then when you actually think about it, what actually happened here was that there were a lot of reshoots done, and the cameras, lighting, setup was completely different to what it was the first time. And if the skin
Mm-hmm.
color from the reshoots doesn't match the skin color from the original shoots, then it makes sense that that would have to be changed, right? And that's why they launched an investigation into this whole thing, and were like, they didn't find anything, but like we said, like at what so these accusations are made. To me, this sounds like a disgruntled guy who like they've had create a creative argument, and maybe Joss Whedon was a bit curt, or maybe he was dismissive of his ideas. Like it seems to me that he's sort of
Mm-hmm.
said, "No, you're an actor. You'll act, and that's it. I don't need your opinion here." And maybe that's not a great way to make a
Mm-hmm.
film, but is that worthy of uh saying, although this is obviously a bad guy and we can't like fund his behavior anymore?
I mean, it's not just Ray Fisher on the Justice League who made accusations
Right.
that Josh Whedon was curt and unprofessional, right?
Yeah.
Like, even if we don't look at any of the larger accusations to
Is it
me,
Gal Gadot as
like,
well?
yeah, Gal Gadot, I think Jason Momoa has stood up supporting Ray Fisher, saying that these things did happen and it was really unprofessional. Um, we haven't heard from Superman, the guy who plays Superman, and we haven't heard from Batman either, but we have three members of the Justice League minimally supporting this story and supporting that Josh Whedon acted in an unprofessional way.
Right. Well, there's two things there for me. Like one is,
Mm-hmm.
um, sh- well, should we draw a distinction between the people who've made accusations and people who've supported people who've made accusations? Because it's easy for someone to sit back and say, "No, I support that person," right? Without necessarily saying, "No, I was privy to those." Do you know what I mean? There's a difference between saying, "Yeah, I was in the room and that happened to me too," and that's and there's a difference between saying, "No, I support that person." So should we make a different like should we draw a line between those two things?
So, this is actually a part of your video that interested me a lot because you had mentioned that you found some of the people supporting accusations
Yeah.
cowardly. And I do think there's a distinction between whether you visually saw something or you're just backing someone up.
Yeah.
In the case of like Gal Gadot and Jason Momoa, it's hard to say whether or not they actually saw what was happening because it is a team movie. So I assume that they might have been physically present, probably were physically present for at least some of the things that Ray Fisher's talking about.
Mm.
Um, Versus I support this person. But even then, like, it's different to support someone versus visually seeing something But I was really curious about your cowardly point, which I guess is getting us off topic,
No,
but I
we'll
wasn't sure.
no, we'll get there definitely, and it's more relevant,
Mhm.
I think, for the Buffy cast, which we'll go into later on. But I guess just
Okay.
before we move on from Marie Fisher,
Mhm.
so these are accusations of I really do want to drop the racism thing, like because I just think there's so much historical evidence to the contrary, but the accusations of being unprofessional, um, and being an asshole, basically, like, do you think these are strong enough accusations to say, no, we really shouldn't support this guy anymore?
Well, I guess it depends on whether or not he used intimidation tactics, right? Did he say, shut up or you won't work here again?
Right.
Or, like, because that kind of thing is definitely not appropriate. Like, you can't threaten someone's job just because you're having a heated argument. And, to be fair to both sides, like, movie sets are high tension areas. You're working very closely with people 16 hours a day in uncomfortable situations. Like, there's going to be tensions and there's going to be unprofessional moments, but it depends. Like, you can't threaten someone because you had that happen, and especially if you're in the position where you can make good on those threats.
So what? Maybe I missed them. Like, were there accusations that he threatened that they wouldn't work again or anything like that?
I mean, I know Gal Gadot said that she had been threatened that way,
Right. Um. So
which
missed
was random, but
I missed
was
that.
definitely something she said.
I missed that. Let me just try and bring it up now. So for me, the Gal Gadot statement I heard, and I might have missed something, but she said that she had her own problems with Whedon that she brought up
Mhm.
with management and were resolved. That's the statement that I heard. But maybe I am wrong about that.
Well, I mean, this could be the problem she brought up and had resolved. Like,
Yeah,
they could have, because they did say that they took some kind of action against Whedon as a result of this investigation.
yeah.
No one ever specified what that was. No one ever specified what he was guilty of, and no one ever specified what actions they took. But there were disciplinary actions taken.
Um,
So, I mean, they must have found merit in something. I guess the problem is we don't really know what. And there's a lot of rumors because it's Hollywood. So we don't know, but there's certain things that I would not be okay with him having done.
so this is an
It seems
article.
likely that's
This is
possible.
an article I'm reading now. It's complex.com. I mean, I don't know if that's a reputable source or not, but they're discussing
It's okay, me
yeah,
neither.
they're discussing the allegations. The Hollywood Reporter says a knowledgeable source who claims Godot spoke with Whedon about his version of Wonder Woman being more aggressive. It seems to me, and I'll go on and read the rest of it, but it seems to me that again these come down to like creative differences. Godot reportedly
Mm.
wanted to make the character flow from one movie to the next, but the disagreement set the tone. What the sources call the biggest clash when Gal was forced by Whedon to say lines she didn't like. Now listen, this is secondhand, but I hear this and I've got to go back to your job is I mean, when did these actors become so self-important that like they won't say the lines that are given to their character because they don't like them? Isn't that their job?
I mean, I guess it is their job to say lines that are given to them. I think, to be fair to Whedon, he came into a very difficult situation. It seems like the cast and the team had really bonded with Snyder and Snyder's
Yeah.
vision. And, they brought Whedon in because they didn't like Snyder's vision, and they gave Whedon direction about what he needed to do to make this movie happen. That might not have been something Whedon wanted either, to be
Yeah, they
totally
brought
fair. Like, this is a whole
yeah.
machine.
It seems like they were unhappy with the seriousness of the tone, and they brought Whedon in to give some levity. I mean, Zack Snyder had to
Mhm.
leave, and I think the implication by Zack Snyder
Mhm.
is that they were happy that he had to leave because they wanted more levity for it to be like Marvel movies. But
Mhm.
allegedly, a witness on set said that Whedon told her that he's the writer and she's going to shut up and say the lines. Uh,
Oof.
and
I don't know that I
I
like
don't
that.
like it. I don't like it necessarily. I don't think that's a good way to
Mhm.
behave. I can understand the sentiment though. I can understand being in that
Mhm.
situation and feeling that. You know what I mean? Whether it's necessarily
Mhm.
professional to say it, but if you're brought in by a studio, you're being paid, make it lighter, and the actor's saying, no, I don't want to say those lines. Maybe I'm a bad person, but my instinct is to say, just fucking say them. Like, it's my job, it's your job, just fucking do it. Like,
Mhm.
maybe,
Yeah, I see that perspective a little bit. The actors are making the job even harder. Like, we might not have wanted to go this direction either. We don't really know. But he came in, the studio told him to do this. He's the bad guy, and the actors are pushing back. Like, I see that.
yeah,
And I can see that frustration seeping out into like unprofessional behavior. Like, I see this scenario. I don't disagree
yeah,
necessarily. Um, I guess my concern is if this is something that was overheard and seen by a lot of people, what was happening in private conversations? Like, if you're comfortable, even in a moment of frustration like this, and there's a lot of closed door conversations happening, is that where you're going too far? Like, where's the line? And have you accidentally crossed it, even though you're also in an untenable situation?
yeah. And well, and should we not give the benefit of the doubt though? Because I mean, if I have so many conversations in private that
Hmm.
if even in situations in the workplace or wherever it may be,
Hmm.
that if they were recorded and leaked, maybe would show me in the most favorable light, and maybe I know
Right.
I say
Hmm.
stupid shit all the time, and I get angry
Hmm.
and all of these sorts of things. I'm a completely flawed human being, right? As I
Hmm.
think we all are, unless I'm an exception to this. But I would be horrified if all of my private conversations were sort of leaked and then I was judged based on the stupid shit that I say.
Hmm.
Should there not be a sort of benefit of the doubt given that these are all secondhand reports? And if they're not secondhand, they're vague reports. And as well as that, they're all conversations that are happening in the workplace in high pressure situations where people say and do stupid shit.
Well, I mean, there's a couple of things. Like, first of all, you are aware enough that you said, hey, I've said and done stupid
Mm,
shit. And if someone said, like, this thing you did was, it hurt my feelings, or I think you said some things that implied blah, whatever it is. And you're like, if you were confronted, you'd be like, oh, that's not what I meant. Or, oh, that was stupid of me. And it was in the heat of the moment. Like, we're not getting any of that. We're getting, he was disciplined. We can't talk about exactly what happened or why, but I haven't heard or seen an apology. I haven't heard or seen an acknowledgement of wrongdoing. Like, that's part of what you do. Like, you make a mistake, sure, everyone does that. But if that's what happened, then just say it. Like, hey, it's 16-hour days. I was working with these actors. They wouldn't give me what I wanted. I had pressure from the studio. It was too much. And I snapped at her. And I shouldn't have treated her like that, but I did. I lost my temper, was under a lot of pressure, and we were under a deadline. And I'm sorry. Like, that's not a hard thing to do.
Well, all right. Well, let's talk about that then, because I've got a few things to say about
Mm-hmm.
that. So let's talk about this idea. So we'll get back to the accusations in a second, but I think this is important to
Mm-hmm.
discuss. Is this idea of apology and I guess
Mm-hmm.
recompense or something like that. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so historically, and I'm looking at a lot of these people that were cancelled and made apologies for whatever reason, and they never ever are accepted by what I call the sort of liberal mob, the people who really want this person to be cancelled, and it doesn't matter if they apologize. Like historically, like they
Mm-hmm.
make their apology, and it's like, no, this isn't good enough. This isn't a good enough apology. So first of all, I don't know if that ever works. That's my first point. This
Mm-hmm.
the second point is, does Joss Whedon owe us an apology? Like, maybe if he feels, I mean, he might not even agree that he overstepped, right? He might even agree that he
Mm-hmm.
did anything wrong, and these are all just still accusations. But if Joss Whedon does owe anyone an apology, it's not the public. I mean, certainly if I offended you,
Mm-hmm.
and we were in this like public, if we were in like a public forum, and I suppose in a sense we are a public forum, I don't wouldn't feel like I owed an apology to like the people watching this video. I'd feel like I owed an apology to you if I believed I offended you, not if you were offended or
Mm-hmm.
upset, right? Like for example, if
Mm-hmm.
you go away from this video now
Mm-hmm.
and you say I was super upset and I feel attacked and offended, right? And I know that you wouldn't,
Mm-hmm.
but it wouldn't change the fact that I don't feel as if I've done anything to offend or upset you, even though you feel
Mm-hmm.
that way, right? So there's two
Mm-hmm.
points here. one is, well, actually, there's three. One is that these apologies historically don't work to appease the people that like want his throat. Um, the second thing is that he may owe an apology to the person, maybe, but definitely not to the public. But you can correct me if I'm wrong on that. And the third thing is, these are accusations, and he may not even feel that he owes an apology. Just because someone feels like you owe them an apology, that may not be the case.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, I get he might not feel he owes them an apology, and if that's the case, then I guess it would be insincere for him to give one to anyone, right? So that's point number three. I'm probably going to do this in reverse.
Okay.
Uh, Point number two, the apology would be to the people he wronged. I don't, I agree with that. The apology would be like to Gal Gadot and maybe anyone else who was offended by what had happened. But even then, you can come out and make a statement like, "This is a personal matter that happened on a set, and I am working with those people and discussing it with them. I'm not going to bring this to the public. I need to talk to them." So you could say something like that. And then I guess the first point, like whether or not the apology works. Like a point of an apology isn't to get people on your side, isn't to get people to forgive you. It's acknowledging that you did something wrong or acknowledging that you have hurt someone accidentally. And that person can not accept your apology and it was still the right move for you to make it.
Mm,
So I just think that's the wrong way to look at an apology. If you feel that you've done something, and in that way, even though he doesn't owe an apology to the larger group of people like you and me, it might make sense to make a statement of regret because you want to express, like, hey, something happened that I'm not proud of. It's become public knowledge, which is embarrassing and difficult for me. But I want you to know that's not who I want to be. And that's not how I want to run things. And these steps are going to happen so this doesn't happen in the future. Like you do that. If you make a mistake and it becomes public knowledge, sometimes you have to talk about, like, what am I going to do different so this doesn't happen again? Or like this was a one-off accidental thing
yeah.
and this isn't how I want to be remembered or reflected upon.
Yeah, but isn't the only reason that you would do that? I mean, that has to be a career move, right? There's like, what is the personal reason for you to apologize? Like, surely the only reason you're making a public statement is for your career. Like, what
I
other
mean,
reason would there be to do it?
that's not really true. Like, as I've been a manager before, right? And I've been in charge of like 30 people.
Mm,
So that's, it's a reasonable amount of people. And I've had tense moments with them where like maybe I snapped at one of them or yelled at them or like, I don't know why you can't just do what I tell you to do,
mm,
which sounds like what Josh Whedon did, or at least is what we're discussing him doing right now.
mm,
And, why can't you just do what I told you to do? And, later I've apologized to that person, like, hey, we were under a lot of pressure.
mm,
You were trying to have a larger conversation with me, and that just wasn't the time. And I shouldn't have responded that way, and it was wrong. But even then, like, I've called all of the employees under all of my group together and talked to them because rumors have gone crazy. And because I want them to know, like, if they do have an issue with what I ask them to do, or if they do feel like there's a better way to do something, they can come to me and talk to me about it. I want that open communication. I don't want them to feel like I'm just going to shut them down and yell at them.
mm,
Um, so there's benefit to not just career wise, like that's not the person I want to be. I want to be the person that collaborates. I want to be the person that you feel comfortable talking with. And if I've done something on my part to shut that communication down, then sometimes, even if I didn't do it to that person individually, I need to, if they know about it, I need to clear the air and let them know.
mm. So I guess that if we carry on with that metaphor, like if you are
Mhm.
Joss Whedon and you're and the employee that you had the altercation with is Ray Fisher, and the rest of the employees are the cast and crew of the movie.
Mhm.
So that all makes sense to me. But would you apologize to the customers as well?
I mean, it would really depend, right? Like if a bunch of customers were videotaping the altercation between me and that employee and it was going crazy on YouTube or whatever, I probably would because I would want those people to know like that's not what the environment is like in my store, right? Like I have a fun environment. I have open communication. I would want them to know that about me. I would want them to know like they caught me in a snapshot moment that was bad. And
But
everyone has a bad snapshot,
yeah, but do you agree that at a certain point this gets a little bit absurd, right? It gets a little bit out of
Yeah,
control.
I can see where you're going with this. I mean, at this level in an employee store situation, like I know quite a few of the patrons and blah 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 blah. But if we're talking about like a Josh Whedon's level, like he and I don't know each other, so it's a little bit
But
weird that he
also,
cares about what I think of him.
yeah, but also, how about this? How about if you had this altercation and you believed actually their criticism isn't justified? Like who you were in that moment was the right thing for you to do. What if you still felt that way and your employees still felt like upset, and I don't know, your customers with their videotapes were still angry. I don't know. Maybe it's not the perfect analogy, maybe,
Mhm.
but what would you do if you were in the right in this, or you still felt that you were in the right in this situation?
I mean, this is probably a personality situation, right? Because I've had this happen too, where people have been like, "No, you were right, and I don't know why you apologized." And for me, like snapping like that is never the right thing to do. Sometimes it might feel like the only thing you could have done in that moment, but that's not the same as it being something that I wanted to do
Mm.
and being something that I want to be a policy moving forward. And from that perspective, like I can always apologize and I can always say like, "Hey, I didn't know what else to do in that moment, but I know I hurt your feelings, or I know I shut down conversation in this way, or I know I changed a relationship in this way and I didn't intend to do that." So for me, there's always a apology point there, even if I'm like, I couldn't have done anything different then. But I'm sorry that it went that way now.
Do you not think? See, for me, an apology at that point is a kind of admission of guilt that I don't want to give, especially if I think it's your fault, right? Especially
Hmm.
if like, let's say for example, again, like we came from before, like we go away from this conversation and let's say like you were super upset, which I know you're not going to be, but let's say that you were super upset and you felt like, he was like unfair to me and he mistreated me, right? Now,
Hmm.
from my perspective, I haven't done that at all, right? I
Hmm.
was civil and we had a discussion. Like there's nothing on this planet that would make me apologize to you. And I
Hmm.
want to know, would I be wrong in that regard? Do you think I would be incorrect though?
So I think in that situation, that's a little bit different, right? Because we're having a nice conversation and I'm not mad. But even if I was, like, this
But you
kind of
could make an
conversation shouldn't.
accusation, right? You could make an accusation of me that like I
Mhm,
asked you unfair questions and you weren't
mhm,
prepared for them and you made me feel uncomfortable and I didn't take the
mhm.
time. I didn't take the time to find out who you were or what you might be upset by or what you might be offended by, and do you know what I mean? Like there's definitely a way that you could spin it and make those accusations.
Oh my goodness, that's a crazy accusation. But ignoring that for a moment, I guess if you get into that sort of situation, the right way to respond is like with puzzlement. Like instead of being defensive, right? And like, I did nothing wrong. I think the way I would handle it is like, what do you mean? Can you point out a specific instance in our video? Like, let's say it was reversed and I'm trying to figure out why you're
Yeah.
mad at me. I'm going to say, like, what do you mean? I thought we had a good conversation. Can you show me where I made a mistake? Like, I'm going to go ahead and assume that your concerns, your complaints are legitimate and that I just didn't see it or I did something accidentally. I'm going to make that assumption and I'm going to ask for clarity. And, maybe you clarify, you're like, oh, right here, time code blah. I'm like, oh, well, I don't know what you're looking at time code blah. So I'm sorry I can't help you, but like ideally we come to a better understanding from that. You say like time code blah. You said like, I don't know, whatever. And I was like, oh, I could see how you take it that way, or I could see why that would have, really tainted the conversation. Hopefully that's what happens. Hopefully I don't look at it and like, I don't know what you're talking about. Because when you do get to a point where you might be stymied, you might be like, I really don't know what you're saying there, and now I have to back away from this
Yeah.
conversation.
All right. Well, let's just move on. The last thing I just wanted to touch on before we just get on to the
Mhm,
final accusation, which I think was really the accusation that caused all of this. Um,
mhm.
I just want to know, what about this idea that, like, just because there's an accusation, it doesn't necessarily mean that there's truth to that accusation. Like, so someone can say, "I accuse you of this,"
Mhm,
and that's something, right? And someone can say, "I support that person," even though that isn't necessarily the same thing as saying that this thing happened. Um,
mhm.
so at what point do we do we have to exercise some doubt or skepticism, or do we just believe the accusation apropos? Like what's the deal? Do you think?
So part of the issue is we're not living in a bubble. Like if we were in a situation where you had accusations and people gave time and space to them and we fully explored them in an objective fashion, then we probably wouldn't be having this
Mm-hmm.
conversation. But there's like a history of certain people making accusations against others and nothing coming from it, or them being shoved under the rug, or even punished in some way for making that accusation. And because of that, like, you have to stop and listen to the, like, individually, you have to stop and listen to the accusation. And unfortunately, we don't have a good system for what justice for that would look like, or what a like what an actual conversation for that would look like. Like, we do not have the facts on this situation. We really don't know what Ray Fisher accused.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's so vague when you look it up. I really don't know, and that makes it hard,
Mm-hmm.
right? Even if I wanted to prove it or do something with that, I couldn't. So to me, like, I want to take accusations seriously. I want to fully hear them out. And if there is a pattern of accusation that starts to emerge, then even though I don't have proof, even though I'm not 100% sure where those accusations are, I have to start to weight them, because more than one person risks some kind of retribution. And the supporting situation is a little bit different. I do think people who support others in these accusations also face a certain level of backlash. So I like to consider that there is support and a vouching system happening, but it's not the same as actually bringing forward another accusation.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Uh, so just before we move on to the final accusation, what we've heard so far, which I guess is the Ray
Mhm,
Fisher stuff, it's the infidelity stuff. Like, this is before we get back to the Buffy stuff. Do you think what we've heard so
mhm.
far is enough for us um, to say no? Like, we're done with Whedon and he shouldn't be making TV shows.
So I wouldn't consider the infidelity stuff at
Mm-hmm.
all. I know we have to in the timeline, but that's like off the
Yeah.
table to me. It's not really my
Okay.
business. The Ray Fisher stuff, it's like a little weight, but it's not all by itself. It's not something that I'd been like, oh, I'm never gonna watch Joss again, or like I hope he doesn't get any shows. It would just be like, gee, I'd really like if there's a little bit more oversight and transparency on his
Mm-hmm.
productions. I think, like, if it was just Ray Fisher all by himself, more transparency and oversight in his productions. So if something inappropriate is happening, someone can step in before it gets to some kind of trigger point.
Okay. Great. All right, so let's move on to what I think was the accusation that really, I mean, the Ray Fisher stuff, I think
Mm,
was dealt with before we even got to this. There seemed to be, like, Ray Fisher made his accusations. I mean, originally there were claims of racism that were, you know, basically just uh they like we he doesn't even talk about those now, right? They were gotten rid of. Like, that was completely unfair. Um but I think it is the Charisma Carpenter accusation that really was the catalyst for all of this stuff. So what I'm going to do now, if you don't mind, I'm just going to read the whole thing out. So we're not, no, it's not coming through a third party. Like, I'm just going to read what she said, so then we can
mhm,
sort of judge it based on that. So here's what she says. She says, "For nearly 2 decades, I've held my tongue, and I've even made excuses for certain events that traumatize me to this day. Joss Whedon abused his power on numerous occasions while working together on the sets of Buffy and Angel. While he found his misconduct amusing, it only served to intensify my performance anxiety, disempower me, and alienate me from my peers. The disturbing incidents triggered a chronic physical condition from which I still suffer. Uh, It is with a beating heavy heart that I say that I coped in isolation and at times destructively. I'm going to skip this bit out, but the next bit she basically says that she's inspired because last summer Ray Fisher made his accusations. She says, like his ongoing passive aggressive threats to fire me, which wreaks havoc on a young actor's self esteem, and callously calling me fat to colleagues when I was 4 months pregnant. He was mean and biting, disparaging about others openly, and often played favorites, pitting people against one another to complete and vie for his attention and approval. He called me in for a sit-down meeting to interrogate and berate me regarding a rosary tattoo I got to help me feel more spiritually grounded in an increasingly volatile work climate. That affected me physically. Joss intentionally refused multiple calls from my agents, making it impossible to connect with him to tell him the news that I was pregnant. And finally, once Joss was apprised of the situation, he requested a meeting with me. In that closed door meeting, he asked me if I was going to keep it, that's a quote, and manipulatively weaponized my womanhood and faith against me. He proceeded to attack my character, mock my religious beliefs, accuse me of sabotaging the show, and then unceremoniously fired me the following season once I gave birth. At 6 months pregnant, I was asked to report to work at 1 a.m. after my doctor recommended shortening my work hours. Due to long and physically demanding days, the emotional stress of having to defend my needs as a working pregnant woman, I began to experience Braxton Hicks contractions. I don't know what that is. I was
False
okay.
labor.
It was clear to me that the 1 a.m. call was retaliatory. And then I think, yeah, I don't have the. That's basically the gist of it. I don't have the second part of that thing. Can I just ask you? Do you have? Sorry, this is not relevant to the debate, but do you have? Do you have the live stream, like open on your computer or anything like that?
I
Okay,
don't. Is there a lot of
I can hear.
echoing?
It's okay. It's probably fine. All right. So, can I just ask
Okay.
you? So, what do you think? Like, what are your impressions of that statement? First of all.
It's a lot to
Yeah.
unpack. And there is mixed things in that statement. I mean, specifically the asked at 1 a.m. to come in to shoot
Yeah.
thing. I don't know enough about like what is normal in the acting world and what's normal when you're pregnant and an actor to comment on that. Like maybe that's completely normal and the fact that she's upset by it is not. Like I don't know.
Well,
That one
I do
specific
know.
one, I'm like, I don't
Well, I
know.
do know that the shooting hours for these shows were insane. These guys were working like
Hmm.
20-hour days. Like it was an
Hmm.
insane schedule that I don't know. So pregnant or not, like it's insane. So if you're pregnant,
Hmm.
I mean, it's obviously untenable to be able to work in that kind of environment. So I know that
Hmm.
these were long, long hours, and that was the norm.
Hmm. Yeah, I just wonder like what the standard is because obviously Charisma Carpenter's not the only person who's ever worked on a TV show while pregnant. So I'm just wondering what allowances are normal and what is considered like you just have to suck it up and deal with it. Because I don't know what that standard, that industry standard is, you know?
Yeah, I mean, it's tricky, isn't it? Because she was like she was the lead in this show, basically, like well, the co-lead. I mean, she's such a big part of the show at that point. She's in most of the scenes. Um, you know, and if you get pregnant and you can't work as much, I mean, I don't I don't know what's supposed to be done there. Like what's your sense of this?
Mhm. I mean, that's the thing is I don't know either. I know that some of the things that Joss said or that she's claiming that Joss said are seem way out of
Hmm.
line. And it's hard to say like because we're so far in the rearview mirror from when these accusations happened, like without I don't know other people coming forward and like I was here and that happened, or I have like these receipts of these days, like here's the extra film where he did this while on camera or something, like which I guess is possible on a film set, but like we don't have any of that. But if even some of the things that she says happened as far as like what he said and did while she was pregnant, that was out of line. Really the 1 a.m. shooting thing. I don't know if that's out of line or not. I do know they work crazy schedules, so that just might be something you have to deal
Hmm.
with. I don't know what the standards are when you're pregnant and working on a show.
Yeah, I mean, my sense of this is that, first of all, like we've got to take into account that this didn't happen yesterday. This is briefly what we
Mhm,
got into in the comments of my last video. We've
mhm,
got to take into account the fact that like this is something that happened 20 years ago. I guess 20
mhm.
years ago. Um, when you're talking about like a young showrunner who is I literally cannot imagine the kind of stress he's dealing with on a daily basis with a network and shows and cancellations and hours and however many people he's got to manage. Like, so I think that needs to
Mhm.
be taken into consideration. So, and what she's basically saying here, for me, correct me if I'm wrong, but what she's saying here is like he was really, really mean to me. Like he didn't come at me from a place of compassion. He was angry that I'd gotten pregnant. He was
Mhm.
mean, um, and you know, and because of that, I developed certain issues. So, like,
So I mean, the problem with him being angry that she'd gotten pregnant is isn't that workplace harassment? Like you can't yell at someone and ask them if they're going to keep their baby. Like imagine if I were again, like if you go back to a retail setting, imagine if like a coworker comes in and tells me that they're
mhm,
pregnant and that they might have to reduce their hours at certain times depending on what their doctor says.
mhm,
I think the hour reduction issue is a very variable in a movie situation. But I still can't fire that person because they're pregnant, and I can't reduce their hours when they don't want me to because they're pregnant. And I can't move them to, I don't know, some kind of junky job because they're pregnant. I can't ask them if they're thinking about having an abortion. Like,
mhm,
that's way out of line. You cannot do
mhm,
that in the workplace. That's and that was way out of line for a long time. It doesn't matter if we're talking about 20 years ago. That's early 2000s.
mhm.
It's still
Well, it
way,
does
way out of
matter in a sense
line.
because I think you and I would agree that that's out of line, and it's not something that, I mean, we both don't know what the etiquette is for something like that because clearly, if a character isn't pregnant and she can't work the hours required of her, I mean, I don't know what else you're supposed to do but not work there anymore. But the time is relevant because if and this is one of the things I mentioned in my video, like if if you pulled me up for something I said when I was 20. I mean, I said all manner of horrible things when I was 20 years old. That it's some of them maybe on video, I don't know, but like if you if I was then to suffer now for something I did, like surely the whole point of being a human being is that you make mistakes and you grow and you become a better person.
Mhm.
Like, so it is relevant that it's
So,
20 years ago that this happened.
so for me, like, yes and no. Because, yeah, we have all done terrible things, and I'm sure I was a much worse person 20 years ago than I am now. Like, I hope I was much worse then than I am now, that I've been improving and getting better and learning more, right? And if that's not the case, then something's wrong with me because I've just been stagnant. But if you brought me this information, like, hey, you discriminated against a pregnant lady and you were awful to her and you caused an intense amount of stress and you forced her to go against what her doctor told her to do, I would be horrified. Like, just horrified that I had done that. And there would be all manner of like apologies and discussions and a lot of internal reflection on my part. Like, and if you wanted to tell me that I had done something wrong and I needed to make amends for something like that, even though it was 20 years in the rearview mirror, yeah, okay, let's talk about what I can do to make this right now. What can I do to avoid this in going forward, and what can I do to make this past thing right? Like for me, that's a
Well, I'd
discussion I
like
would
to know an
have.
answer to that question. Like, what can you do to make that past thing right? Surely, is there anything you can do?
So I don't know. And to be honest with that situation, like you'd probably have to go and talk to Charisma Carpenter. Like her and Joss would have to work that out somehow. And maybe there's nothing he can do. And maybe the only thing that can happen is that we're all just more aware and we come up with a plan so this doesn't happen in the future. Like that's not mine to forgive. But like, if there was a situation like that in my life, and I found out I had done something, I don't know, really sexist or racist or discriminatory to someone, I would want to make that right. I would want to go find that person. I would want to apologize. I'd want to discuss whatever I could with them, or just listen to what they had to say to me. But it wouldn't look like me blowing them off. I
Hmm.
can tell you that.
Well, all right. Well, I mean, I suppose we don't know what conversations they've had behind closed doors. I mean, again, I do know if someone came at me with that information and were like, what can you do to make sure that doesn't happen in the future? I'd be incredibly pissed off and patronized because I would think, well, yeah, I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll grow up 10 years, which is what I've done, or I'll grow up 20 years. Like, I don't need to,
Well,
I
but
don't,
then you can point to things like, hey, that was me 10 years ago. I had this kind of mindset, and my mindset has changed in these ways, so this won't happen anymore. But I am really sorry that happened then. Like, it's not hard to say that. Like, I grew up,
but, but
I'm
my,
more sensitive to these things now.
But my issue is, like, say that to who? Like, I don't know if he's had conversations with her or not. Like, again, maybe he doesn't feel like her claims are justified or even true. But, like,
Mhm.
I just don't think he owes the world an apology, like, for something he did when he was 20, just the same, well, 30. But just the same way I don't owe the world an apology for any of the stupid shit I did 10, 15 years ago or whatever it was. Like that's my issue here. It's like, number one, I think the accusations, uh, as they are, and I do think this is the worst one, by the way. I do think out of all of them, this is the one where I think, yeah, this sounds like a guy under extreme amounts of pressure who reacted really, really badly to a situation that it was completely out of his control in an environment where it was his job to control everything that happened. Like, that's what this looks like to me. And I do think he reacted in a bad way. And I think, I mean, I do not know Joss Whedon. Although, incidentally, side note, I have met Joss Whedon. I was working in a coffee shop once in Richmond, and he came in from a run and ordered a cup of tea. And I told him I really liked his work, and he thanked me and sat down and drank his tea. But that's neither here nor there. I still don't know the content of his character, but I do feel probably he is probably embarrassed and ashamed of what happened. Having said that, if I was him, I would do exactly what he's doing now, and I wouldn't say a word. Maybe I'd get in touch with Charisma Carpenter and talk it out with her, but I certainly wouldn't make any kind of public statements.
I mean, I could see that, like, not making any public statements and just keeping it between you and Charisma Carpenter. I think the problem with that at this point is that Charisma Carpenter came out, she made her allegations public, and now the ball, I guess, is a little bit in her court. But like, if Josh has come and done those kind of things with her, and there's something, like, that's a follow up at this point in time because she's made it public, that I feel like she needs to make, like, because that's really difficult. She has all these people supporting her. She has all these other accusations that are much smaller that have come out as a result of this. And it's just like, well, did he discuss this with you? Did anything happen? Like, or has this just been a terrible thing that's plagued your life? Uh,
Yeah,
like, because she made it public, I feel like she needs to continue that. Like, oh, he's had conversations with me and it's not enough, or he's had conversations with me and we've come to a place of acceptance. Something. You
I
wouldn't usually have to do that, but unfortunately, they're public figures that made this really public. Like, they expected us to respond or do something, and it's hard to do that when you just don't have the information to do anything.
Yeah, I mean, I can't. Well, first of all, I think she is. So this is might be an interesting point. I think she is 100% completely wrong to come public with this. I completely think she is out of order um, to come public for this. This is an issue with her and Joss. And like literally, if someone did something to me 20 years ago, well, first of all, I'd be 10 years
Mhm,
old. But in 10 years' time, if someone did something to me 20 years ago,
mhm,
um, the fact that then I would not go to that person, but I would talk
mhm.
about it in a public forum, like even if it was like hospitality or retail or something, that I would not go to that person, but I would then talk up to all of his bosses and his customers, and I'd say, no, this person did something to me that I really felt badly about 20 years ago, and you all need to know about it now. like the only reason for me to come forward in that point is for you people to then have retribution on this person, and that completely doesn't take into account that they might have changed. It doesn't give them the benefit of the doubt. It doesn't practice any kind of forgiveness. Like, so I think she's completely wrong uh to talk about this in a public forum.
So we don't know if she did try to reach out to Joss privately first.
Hmm.
Like maybe the reason this has come to a public forum is because she did try to reach out to him. She did try to talk to him. She did try to get some kind of conversation going, and he blew her off. And he kept blowing her off, and he kept blowing her off. And finally, she said, "No, what happened was wrong. What he did was wrong. And if he's not going to address it with me, I'm going to make him deal with it." And like this was the only way she knew how to make that happen.
Well, yeah, but I completely disagree that that is a moral thing to do. I think that is a completely immoral thing to do. I mean, first of all, yeah, you're right. We don't know
Mm-hmm.
whether sh she tried to reach out. Maybe she did, maybe she didn't. But we don't know, so we can't talk about that. But to then say no,
Mm-hmm.
I'm gonna crucify this. Well, crucify is inflammatory. Maybe that's not the right word, but I'm gonna I'm gonna now have an impact on this person's career because I'm angry
Mm-hmm.
about it, whether or not he's a reformed or a better person now. And then maybe you could argue she didn't think he was reformed because of the Ray Fisher, whatever. But I think it is a
Mm-hmm.
completely immoral thing to do. Not as bad as Michelle Trachtenberg, by the way. What she did was completely wrong. I don't know if you know about that, but
I've read the accusations she
oh
made.
my
Yeah.
goodness, that was
They're so vague and also so concerning. Why did you do that? Just tell me
well,
what the issue
she
was.
knows exactly why she did that, I think, but she had to clarify it very, very quickly. But it's neither here nor there. But I guess the point I'm
Mm-hmm.
making is, I think it is completely wrong to make a
Mm-hmm.
public accusation of someone for something someone did 20 years ago. Um, and I think the only reason you would want to do that is to have some kind of like you harbor resentment and you want some kind of retribution. And I think both of those emotions are bad and shouldn't be uh, should be quelled as quickly as they've arrived.
So I feel like she could have been doing it from a place of trying to protect others. Like
Right.
we're talking about it now where it's Ray Fisher and Charisma Carpenter are really the two main people. But what if Charisma Carpenter had come out and a bunch of other people had been like, yeah, he's done this to me too, and this happened on the set, and that, like, for all she knew, this was a pattern that was happening to a lot of women and was and men now too, and that was continuing to happen on sets all the time. And her silence was contributing to other people's torment. Like
Yeah,
she
but
couldn't have
hmm
known that.
hmm she couldn't have known that. But I mean, the question is, to what extent do you fall on either side? Because you've got to look at like the
Mm-hmm.
consequences for your actions. It's like, well, I don't know if he's tormenting everyone that he comes across. Maybe he is, maybe he isn't.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm going to err on the side that he is, and so I'm going to make this statement, right? It's like no, like part of the thing about being like a compassionate, empathetic human being is that you err on the opposite side. Surely you go, well, maybe this person, I'm going to give this person the benefit of the doubt because if I don't, then the consequences of this are enormous. I destroy this guy's career.
Right, but like you're talking about destroying this one guy in power or letting a whole bunch of people who are relatively helpless in a situation be continually harmed and damaged. Like I guess it just depends on where your compassion lies and who you think you need to protect. Do you need to protect the guy who's holding all the power, or do you need to protect all these people who are being victimized hypothetically? And it looks like maybe it was just Charisma Carpenter and Ray Fisher who had issues, which maybe changes the situation, but she couldn't have known that when she came out and made those accusations. In her mind, maybe there were like dozens of people like her, and she was concerned that this was going to just keep happening and keep happening if she didn't say something.
Yeah, I understand that, but the difference is that one thing is an unknown quantity and one thing is known, right? So you don't know the extent of this sort of projected abuse of Joss Whedon, but you do know the
Mm-hmm.
consequences for speaking out, right? So one thing is a sort of a kind of certainty, and one thing is a completely unknown thing. Like we not, but and none of us make decisions like that, right? We look at what we know and what is
Mm-hmm.
can be certain and what can be proved, and then we don't take into account, well, all of these things could be the case, so I'm going to act as if. You know what I mean?
I mean, I think that's not really true. Like a lot of people, when they're trying to decide whether or not to report a crime, they might decide based off of whether or not they think that person is going to continue to perpetuate that crime. Um, te- Technically, if what she says is true, she was discriminated against, and there was workplace harassment. Those are both kinds of crimes. It is illegal to discriminate against pregnant people in the workforce, you know? So if she thinks that this is a crime that's happening, that other people are being bullied like this, and her not reporting the crime is part of what's allowing this offender to reoffend, then she might feel obligated to stop that. Like, how many victims does she feel are on her conscience? It's just a thought.
Yeah, and I understand. I understand where you're coming from. I mean, the it, it is. I mean, Hollywood is not the real world, right? So it's hard to talk
Mhm.
about this in terms of discrimination against pregnant women. I mean, the fact is, if your character isn't pregnant in the show and you are pregnant, I mean that's a problem, right? And if you can't work the hours that are necessary to film this TV show, then the TV show isn't going to get filmed. So it's difficult to talk about this in terms of uh, discrimination against like pregnant women in the workplace, because this is such an unreal workplace that these rules clearly would like never written to address. So it's difficult in that regard. But I take your point, and I understand. You know, I understand where you're coming from there. Um, I guess finally, what I would say is that these accusations. I mean, again, the worst of them is I feel Charisma Carpenter's accusation, and this is
Mhm.
something that happened such a long time ago, and we have the Ray Fisher stuff, which maybe you think that there's some merit to. I think is nonsense. Like to me, what I've read about it, it seems to me that it is a creative clash that he's maybe handled in a not a very good way, an environment where he probably wasn't happy being, and like whatever. For me, and I think we came to common ground where we were like they are not bad enough, but I think you said that if they're part of a pattern, then maybe they're relevant. Is that correct?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. If they're part of a larger pattern, then it's a problem. Like it's,
Then it becomes relevant.
mhm.
So the last
Yeah.
thing I'd say is that just like the amount of testimonies in Joss Whedon's favor in terms of sets that he's worked on, it seems to completely outweigh. I mean, you will never hear any of the Firefly cast doing anything other than sing this guy's praises. Similarly, with when he worked on Avengers, the Nevers cast have all come out and said they loved working with him. It was such a great, positive set. They've never been on a better set. Like it was a pleasure. Um, and so we just seem to like you don't hear any of that in any of the articles that you read. You don't hear any kind of dissenting opinion. It seems to be like no, he's a bad dude, here's why, and we're not going to even acknowledge the people that said no, we loved working with him, it was a blast. Like how do you feel about that?
So, I mean, we do hear about, or at least I heard about it. I heard about how the Nevers really were into Josh Whedon on set, and I've heard all the great stories about him on Avengers too. I haven't really heard anything Firefly one way or the other. So I'll admit that's news to me.
Mm.
I think part of the conversation too is like, has Joss Whedon really been punished and or disciplined? Like, yes, he was taken from the Nevers, and probably because of this, probably not pandemic related. But other than that, we really haven't seen anything, come out to hurt him about this. Like it's been an unfortunate publicity moment for him if nothing bad really happened. But I mean, has there really been any punishment or anything like that? Is his career really suffering from this? Certainly, I think he could work on the Avengers again or with Marvel again if he wanted to, no problem.
uh well, I don't think so. I wish I was as optimistic as you, but I think that if you look at the critical reception for this and how the critics, I mean, but first of all, we've got a dog in the shot, and I love that
Oh yeah,
because
that's Willow.
the dog's in the thumbnail. So if there was no dog in the video, that would have been an extreme disappointment. Um,
No, she makes guest appearances pretty much everywhere.
great. Um, So I wish I was as optimistic as you, but I really think the critical reception of this, I think we agree, is completely informed by the accusations, and people are unwilling to let the accusations go when they discuss this work critically. And I don't see that changing, at least in the near future.
I think the public has definitely review bombed it, but I don't know about critical response. I see a lot of positive podcasts and positive YouTube reviews about the Nevers, which is fine. Everyone is allowed to like or dislike the show on its own merits. And certainly, I'm still hoping I'm going to like the show. Certainly, the first two episodes of a lot of Whedon's work, I've been like, I don't know how I feel about this. And then he really pulls me in. So I'm hoping for that same moment later. Um,
Yeah. Well, then I guess the last question is, I mean, it seems like you are not sort of I guess the ultimate question of this is: do you think that the accusations against Joss Whedon um, are sufficient enough or strong enough when pitched against his assets and I guess the good things people say about him to justify like not watching the show and not allowing him to make anything further?
So I think everyone gets to make their own decision on that. For me, I am watching the show. Part of the reason I'm watching it is because I like the concept, and I know after episode 6 he's not involved, so it's not really a controversy anymore at that point in time. And I want to support everyone else who's involved in the show, and I want to support the concept. As far as future endeavors that he does, I don't know. I would have told you probably not before, or definitely not before. But it's an evolving thing to me a little bit. Like we have to see, I have to see anyways, where these accusations go, if more come out, if there's some kind of more substantial something, because it feels very nebulous in a lot of ways. Charisma Carpenter's obviously being the most specific and the strongest ones we have. And what happened there was wrong, but a little bit, it's hard to know what to do with that.
Mm-hmm.
Um, you know, it would help me if there was a pattern and it was specific, and then I could say, nope, I'm done. Or if Josh Whedon would come out and say almost anything about it, that showed some kind of regret or some kind of changes or some kind of future oversight, so this doesn't happen anymore. Um, all of that would be fine from my perspective, and then I could guilt-free watch it and enjoy it. I want to watch it. I really want to, and I think that's part of what's hard for a lot of Joss Whedon fans is we would really, really love to watch his shows, but we just have to, at least for me, I have to ask, like, can I do that? And if I can't, why not? Like, am I making the right decision for the right reasons? And it's something I'm probably gonna have to struggle with the next time he comes out with a show, to be honest.
Well, I mean, I really like hope that he does. I mean, if I was him, I don't know whether I would
Mm-hmm.
want to go through all this again, but I guess we'll see. And I guess anyone watching this video can make up their own mind. I think um, from my perspective, it's not an issue. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
he, as far as I'm concerned, you look at the accusations; they're just not even close to being bad enough that I would say. Especially I mean, the recent ones. There's so little substance to them. The older ones, yeah, I agree, were wrong. We didn't talk about the James Masters thing, which I also think was is not good.
Yeah,
It's,
that was a crazy thing
yeah,
that happened to James Marston.
it's not a
Oh
good
my
way to
goodness.
behave. But
And it's insane to me how often he mentions that at conferences and stuff, and he has consistently tried to frame it as something that's like Joss being passionate. So it's okay that he was physically attacked on set, but
yeah.
it's like no, that was rough that he did that to you.
Yeah, well, and I guess it comes down to the thing as well is that like how much you, as someone who is the victim of this kind of thing, like how much you can take.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's clear that James Masters doesn't harbor any resentment and
Mm-hmm.
he's fine. And in fact, James Masters sort of admits that he was being kind of provocative and he was trying to sort of, so
Mm-hmm.
it's like to what extent are the actions, because one of the things that we didn't talk about, which was that Charisma Carpenter said she's had all kinds of serious issues, and I didn't bring that up because I
Mm-hmm.
don't think it's relevant, because what issues you had is on you, right? It's about your character. What you've got to address are the actual things themselves. Because, like I said, if you come away from this conversation and for the next 20 years you have traumatic nightmares, like, that's not my fault, right? So it's about the thing itself, right? It's about that.
Mhm.
You've got to judge that on its own merits and not what I mean, am I wrong about that? Like, what the result of it was?
I mean, I think sometimes the results, like her having a long-term issue, speaks to the seriousness of the situation she was in. That it wasn't just like someone being a little bit mean to her, the fact that there's some kind of lasting issue. And a little bit too, the fact that James Marster seems to be okay with that attack that happened on set, being pushed against the wall
Hmm.
and, um, Whedon yelling in his face. The fact that he is okay with that, like a little bit, you're like, okay, I'm going to accept it because this guy accepted it. But also, part of me goes that that behavior was unprofessional and it
Yeah.
probably shouldn't have happened. And we probably should put something in place so that that doesn't happen again. Like, it's great that Marster is not going to make a big issue out of it, but maybe we shouldn't do that because that's just not human behavior we want.
Yeah, but that's the point, isn't it? It's like but that's what I'm trying to say. It's like it's not about the reaction to the behavior, because you could have an extremely sensitive
Mm-hmm.
personality and you could have like anything that someone says to you could have traumatic implications in the weeks to come, but that doesn't mean that the thing that they said is necessarily bad or wrong. So it has to be about the act itself, right? I mean,
Mm-hmm.
you said that like the 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 trauma that she experienced speaks to the severity of the incident, but it doesn't necessarily, right? Because everyone's going to have a different reaction to, like, what he did to James Masters was probably worse. Like, if we'd have heard that he did that to Charisma Carpenter, but we'd be like, holy shit! Like, it would have been, what he did was probably
Mm-hmm.
worse, but we don't think of it as worse because of the reaction. But that's not really right. Like, it's got to be about the incident itself, right? It's got to be right, the whether
Mm-hmm.
that's a good thing or a bad thing, like, in the first place.
Well, I mean, pretty much what he did to Charisma Carpenter, if we ignore the discrimination, is he did the same thing to James Marster, except he also got physical with James Marster. I guess the question is getting up in someone's face and yelling and berating them about their character and how they've messed up the character, how the audience is responding to the character in a way that you don't like. Is that is that professional and is that harassment? And if that is harassment and something we don't want, then both those incidents were highly inappropriate.
Yeah, well, it's
And it
certainly.
doesn't matter how either one of them
Yeah,
reacted,
well,
really.
it doesn't matter how they react. It's certainly not professional. I think we can both definitely agree on that.
Yeah.
All right, so look, well, first of all, I want to thank you again for doing this. Like, I literally, I just messaged Jessica out of the blue on Facebook, and I asked her to do this, and she said yes. And I'm like really thankful that you did this, and I'm really happy that we did this. So I just want to thank you for doing this before we finish.
Well, thank you for having me. It's been a fun conversation. I'm glad we were able to do it.
Great. All right, so thank you everyone for watching this video. Please do like and subscribe if you enjoyed it. Also subscribe to or go and check out Jessica's channel and her book, which is Follow Me, Tattered Veils, and all of those links are in the description below. I hope you enjoyed this conversation, and I will see you